Welcome to Online Church, everyone. Thank you for joining us once again here online through maybe on your phone, on your computer. I've heard some of you even watch us on the TV. And I just want to say hi to people all over the U.S. I know some of you are watching us from Ohio. Some of you have been watching us from Michigan. I know there's a few people who've been watching us in Oklahoma. So it's great to see you all over the United States and maybe even some of you around the world watching us, maybe some of you in Brazil. So it's good to see you all online. As we do the service, since we're not close to one another physically, we really encourage you and invite you to connect with one another in the comment section of this online service. So what we want you to do is we just want you to say hello to one another. If you see someone on there that you haven't been able to talk to in a while, let them know, hey, I'm glad to see you online. Ask them how they've been doing. Let them know that you've been praying for them, that you miss them, and you can't wait to get back together with them again. There's a phrase that I keep hearing people say. Almost everybody is saying this phrase. They keep saying, stay safe. Everyone's saying, stay safe. So here's what I want to say to you as a follower of Jesus. I want to say, stay safe. But I also want to say to stay with your faith. And rather than live in fear, stay with your faith. Well, this is the final message in a series we have called, I Deserve It. In this 3-week collection of messages, what I've been doing is I have been taking a look at different characters from the Bible who deserve something bad because of something they've done or because who they've become. They deserve something bad. But what I've been telling you is because of the grace and goodness of Jesus, God doesn't give them what they deserve. The title of this message today is this: I deserve rejection. But man, God gave me acceptance. And that's what I want to talk to you about today. I want to talk about a need that I believe all of us have, which is the need for acceptance. One of the things that hurts the most in this world, in our lives, is to be rejected. Nobody wants to be the person who's left out or overlooked or pushed away. Maybe you remember, maybe some of you experienced it recently, what it's like to be in a school cafeteria. In every school cafeteria around the world, you have that popular table, and then you have that almost popular table, and then you have that unpopular table, and then you have that table way over there in the corner. And if you're sitting at that table, you feel like you are being rejected. You're not someone who believes that you're accepted. Now think about this. Today we have devices, we have technology that proves how precious and how important acceptance is to us. We have technology that we hold in our hands, and we all spend an average of 3.5 hours looking at this device, this technology that we have in our hands. And we look at it for different reasons over this 3.5 period in a day's time. We look at it to see how many friends we have or we don't have. And we look at it to see how many likes I have today or how many likes I haven't received today. We look at this device in our hand to see, okay, what are my friends doing today? And then we ask the question, why am I not doing that with them? And I think about this as well. With this technology that we have where we can communicate with one another, we have unspoken rules, unwritten rules. And one of those rules is this. If I text you, if I send you a text message and say something to you and don't hear from you for about 3 days, then you have clearly communicated to me a message that I'm not important enough for you to text back to me within that 24-hour response window that says, I'm really an important friend in your life. And for some people, when you don't get that response within that amount of time, it really, really hurts. Now, I think most of us imagine and believe that as we grow older and we become adults, that rejection, it kind of goes away. But let's all be honest and truthful and admit that, you know what, as we grow older, it not only doesn't go away, but sometimes it stings even worse than it did when we were young. Some of us, we grow up and we try out for a team and we get cut, and so we feel rejected. Some of us, we apply for college. You apply for college hoping to get into this one particular college, and you don't get accepted, so you feel rejected. You interview for a job and you expect to get it and they give it to somebody else, and so you feel rejected. All of your friends are dating somebody and you can't find anybody to date, and so you feel rejected. Or the person who looked you in the eyes and promised to love you for better or worse, they've recently come to you and said, I love somebody else, and you feel rejected. Or maybe your kids have grown up and become adults and moved out of your house, and now they don't even want to be around you anymore. They don't respond to your text messages or your phone calls or your messages on any platform, and you feel rejected. We all want acceptance, which is where the struggle comes in, because eventually at one time, you will be rejected. You will be rejected. I have been rejected. I have been rejected in my life more than once. And since I've been a pastor, since I graduated college, unfortunately for me, the rejection that I have felt in my life has happened within the church. It's been people in the church who have rejected me, who I felt hasn't accepted me. I never imagined in my lifetime, as I grew up and I knew that, God's calling me to be a pastor, I never imagined that I would sit in another pastor's office and the pastor would look at me and say things to me like, I'll make sure that you're never a pastor. I'll do whatever it takes, he told me, to make sure that you're never a pastor. In that moment, I just wanted to be accepted, but instead I was rejected. I never imagined in my life as a pastor that I would sit in a district office around leaders who have been pastors for years and be surprised by the fact that another pastor had shown up and said some things about me. And whereas before I was accepted around this table, now as those leaders looked at me, I was realizing that they're not accepting me in this moment. They have reasons that it feels like they're rejecting me. I never imagined that into my career, I would be working at a church and one day they would come to me and say, the service that you're leading is no longer going to be in existence in a matter of a month. Again, I felt rejected. And then I didn't think that I would show up into a leader's office and this person would say to me, I'm going to take away your church credentials. In that moment, I felt rejected. And even more so in my daily life as a pastor, it's very difficult for me to look at things and think to myself, am I being accepted or am I being rejected? I mean, honestly, every single week when I give a message, I wonder, are you accepting me in the message that I'm bringing or are you rejecting me? That's something that every pastor around the world deals with. And now we're doing church online. And so I'm not just giving the message. I get to often watch what's happening with you and the interaction you're having online with the service. And so I get to see at the top of the page that I'm looking at how many people are viewing the message and the service. And so in my mind, I'm thinking about, are we being accepted as a church? Am I being accepted as a pastor? Or is this rejection? All of us want acceptance, but there will be times in our lives when you are rejected. And so what I want to do today is I want to take a look at a story from the Bible of a person who absolutely 100% deserved to be rejected. And the reason why I want to look at this person's story is for some of you who are watching and listening to this message right now. Because whether you deserve it or not, some of you are feeling rejected. And the person in this story understands your pain. In the Gospel of Luke chapter 19, we're introduced to this person that I want you to know, I want you to meet. We're introduced to him in the book of Luke chapter 19, and when we are introduced to him, this is what we're told. We're told that he's a chief tax collector and that he's rich. And you have to know that these two things make him one of the most hated, rejected people in his society. So it's safe to say that this person whose name is ZACCHAEUS, he is struggling with rejection. I mean, he has a lot of money, but according to what we have just been told about him, he doesn't have a lot of friends, which means he doesn't have a lot of support. And because of this, it's creating in him a spiritual curiosity. You can read about it in the Gospel of Luke, chapter 19, verses 1 through 3. We see some things happening. Jesus is is about to enter their town. Jesus has been traveling all around the region, and wherever Jesus is headed, word gets out quick that Jesus is coming in your direction. And so as Jesus goes toward people's towns, the people in those towns, they get ready for Jesus. Like, they're excited for Jesus because they've never seen him before. They've never witnessed what he's done. They've only heard these things. And so people get together and they tell each other about it and they get themselves ready, almost like a parade is coming to town. And so in this story, and we know that Jesus is coming to the town where Zacchaeus lives. And it tells us that he's curious about it. And in verse 3, if you look at it, it tells us that Zacchaeus wanted to see who Jesus was. Like everybody else, he wanted to see who Jesus was. But because he was short, he couldn't see over the crowd. I'm like, come on, man. If things couldn't get worse from this guy. I mean, in addition to all the other reasons why he's being rejected, he's also being rejected because of his height. Maybe that's the reason why he's acting the way that he does. And maybe that's the reason why he's become who he's become. Because he's covering up all the rejection that he's received, even though he doesn't deserve it, just because of his height. Maybe he's covering all that up by doing things that causes him to be rejected for reasons that he does deserve, because at least he can control that. I don't know if that's true for Zacchaeus, but what I do believe I know is true is something about you and I. And that is when you and I, when we are hurt and rejected, we have two choices. We can run back to the people who have rejected us, hoping that they'll approve. Or like Zacchaeus, we can run to Jesus instead. Now, watch what happens in this story. In verse 4, it tells us that because Zacchaeus was curious about who Jesus was, it tells us he ran ahead and he climbed a sycamore tree. He ran ahead and climbed a sycamore tree. Now, no self-respecting Jewish man would ever run and certainly not climb a tree. That's something that only somebody like a slave would do. Maybe today an equivalent of this absurd action that Zacchaeus has taken is this. Maybe you can imagine yourself sitting in a business meeting, a suit and tie kind of business meeting. You're all sitting around the round table and you're discussing something critical for your company. You have the president and you have the vice president and all the board members. Everybody's there. Somebody has brought the presentation of what they think your company should do in order to move forward and press on to things that are critical to the survival of your company in the future. You're sitting around this table, this business meeting, and everybody's serious and everybody's been pouring energy into making sure that you're going to make a wise decision. And then in the middle of this conference that you're having with all the important people in your company, you push yourself back from the table. You stand up from your chair. You walk around the back of your chair, and then you drop down and you do 25 push-ups. And then you jump up and you do 25 jumping jacks. And then after that, you drop down and you do 25 push-ups. And you jump up and you do 25 more jumping jacks. And you do that about 3 or 4 more times because you've hired somebody, a trainer, to tell you when to work out and how to work out, and that's why you're doing it. If you did that, it would be ridiculous, socially unacceptable. But I've got to tell you this. There are some times in your life that you have to do what's socially unacceptable in order to get close to Jesus. That's exactly what we see Zacchaeus do in this story. In verse 4, it tells us that he's curious about Jesus. So he runs ahead and he does something socially unacceptable. He climbs a sycamore tree. Now check out what happens next. As Jesus is passing through the city where all these people are waiting to see him, and Zacchaeus is in the tree, it tells us that when Jesus gets to the spot where Zacchaeus is in the tree, he looks up and he calls him by his name. How does Jesus even know his name in the first place? I have no clue. But he calls him by his name. And you probably don't know this. I don't think very many people knew this. But his name means righteous one, which is the opposite of how he's been living. It's the opposite of who he's become. That's probably a name that he hasn't heard in a very long time, because nobody is going to use a name that calls him out as the righteous one, because he's been living in the opposite of somebody who would be considered righteous. But Jesus calls him by that name anyways. He says, Zacchaeus, righteous one. I wonder how many of you, it's been a long time since you've heard someone call out a name over you that was something other than putting you down. Some of you hear words that put you down all the time. Some of you hear 4-letter words that put you down all the time. People don't even know who you are anymore, other than somebody they just speak against in ways that are judgmental and forceful, and they're just rejecting you for who you are and the things that you've done. I wonder how many of you, it's been a really long time since somebody has spoken good words over you. Maybe you don't even deserve it, but what if just somebody said, you know what? You're somebody who deserves to be called the person that God has created you to be. And that's what Jesus does in this moment. He looks at Zacchaeus and he says, righteous one, Zacchaeus, come down quickly, because I'm going to stay at your house today. I'm going to stay at your house today. Now here's what I want you to do. I want you to put yourself in the crowd. I want you to put yourself in the crowd. Are you there yet? Are you standing in the crowd? If you're not sure what it might look like for you to be standing in this crowd, just think of a parade at Disney World on Christmas or New Year's. People everywhere lined up hours in advance, just waiting for the parade to come by. Maybe if you've never been to a parade at Disney World, maybe you've been at a parade at New York City for Macy's Thanksgiving. Think about the people. Maybe you haven't been there, but you've seen the people on the TV as you've watched. You've seen how many rows of people are standing there in a crowd just waiting for the parade to pass by. Okay, maybe you haven't even seen that. Maybe you have been a part of Carnival in Brazil, and you've seen how many people show up just to watch this procession pass you by. So are you there yet in the crowd? Are you standing there, and do you see the families? And do you see the moms holding the babies? Do you see the dads with the toddlers on their shoulders? Do you see the teenagers in groups of 10 to 20 just kind of hanging out together? Do you see the siblings fighting and arguing with one another because they're hot and they're tired and they're hungry and they need to go to the bathroom, and maybe they want to get to the front but they can't because all the other adults and their families are standing in the front? Can you see the crowd? Can you put yourself in the crowd? Are you standing there and watching and waiting to see what Jesus looks like as he passes by? Because if you're there, then you probably can imagine yourself thinking this thought: what in the world is happening? You'd be thinking to yourself, as you watch Jesus come up to this tree, look up into it and say, Zacchaeus, come down quickly, because I'm going to spend my day at your house. This is what you would be thinking. No way. There's no way. There is no way that Jesus has heard about this person, because that person right there who's in that tree, he's pathetic. He's a pathetic person. I never see him at church. I know, because I go to church every single weekend. I'm there at church. I tithe. I give above and beyond my tithe. I serve at my church, and I don't see him coming to church, let alone serving at our church. I serve on the hospitality team at my church. That's right. I show up early, and I set up chairs, and I open doors, and I make coffee, and I welcome people. And this person that Jesus is telling to come down from the tree, this Zacchaeus that he's calling him, that person, he's not even welcome in any church around here. If you're in the crowd, that's what you would be thinking. Now, this next thing I'm about to say isn't something that Jesus said. We don't read this in God's word, so if I'm saying it wrong, God forgive me. But this is what I think is happening with Jesus. Jesus knows what the crowd is thinking, but Jesus doesn't care. Jesus doesn't care what the crowd is thinking. Instead, he ignores the crowd and he goes to the most unhealthy, unrighteous person standing in all of their midst up in the middle of a tree. Now, why would Jesus do something like that? That's a question I think everybody was asking. And the answer is because that's exactly the kind of person that Jesus came for. Jesus looks at Zacchaeus and he says, come down quickly because I'm going to stay at your house today. And in the next verse, it tells us that Zacchaeus comes down at once. And the crowd begins to grumble. How is this happening? They begin to complain. They begin to judge. They begin to say to one another, this isn't fair. This isn't right. This is unjust. And you know what? Maybe a lot of the things that they're thinking and complaining and grumbling about, maybe they are justified because the way that Zacchaeus has been acting, it absolutely, according to those things, makes him somebody who deserves rejection. But Jesus' ministry and Jesus' mission here on earth isn't to bring to people the things that they deserve. The mission of Jesus, the reason why Jesus left heaven to come to earth is to give people what they don't deserve. The amount of time that it took Zacchaeus to climb down from the limb to the ground, which was what? Maybe 7 seconds. In that 7 seconds, Jesus completely changes his life. So I have got to tell you this today, those of you who are willing to listen, I have got to tell you this today, that in a matter of seconds, your life can be transformed by the grace of Jesus. And I don't care how bad you are, and I don't care how bad other people say you are. In a matter of seconds, you can be transformed, you can be forgiven and made new in the presence of Jesus. You see immediate transformation in Zacchaeus' life. The second that he climbs down from that tree, he starts to live different. It tells us in the story that he gave 50% of his income to the poor, even though the law only requires him to give 20%. And then it tells us that he pays back 400% of what he had stolen from others in their taxes, even though the law only requires him to give 120%. Why would he do this? It's because it's an extravagant response to Jesus' extravagant love. This is something that I want you to hear. Please don't miss this. Zacchaeus didn't do this to get Jesus' approval. He did it because he got Jesus' approval. And that's what happens to us when our lives are transformed by the goodness and the grace of Jesus. What happens is suddenly you belong to God, I belong to God, we belong to God, and we start to do things that don't make sense to the rest of the world. And honestly, it don't make sense to the former self that we used to be. We end up doing things such as forgiving somebody who doesn't deserve it. And we no longer wear ourselves out living for the approval of others. And instead, we live from the approval of Jesus. I don't know what that sounds like to you, but to me, that sounds like good news. It just sounds like good news that I no longer have to live my life always consumed by the hurt that I feel because I'm being rejected and not accepted by others, and just expending all that energy trying to prove that I'm worthy, trying to prove that they should love me, trying to prove that they should accept me. I don't have to be that person anymore, but instead I can live from the approval of a God who gives it to me even though I don't deserve it. To me, that is good news. So let me tell you how this story ends. In the Gospel of Luke, chapter 19, Jesus finishes out this story by saying something in front of everybody, the whole crowd and Zacchaeus, and this is what he says. He says, today, Today, salvation has come to this home because this man too, Zacchaeus, is a son of Abraham. And Jesus says, for the Son of Man, and he's talking about himself, for the Son of Man came to save the lost. Don't ever miss this. Jesus didn't come for the found. Jesus came for the lost. Jesus didn't come for the healthy. Jesus came for the sick. Jesus didn't come for the righteous. Jesus came for the sinners. And when we recognize that, our only sensible response will be to give our entire life to Jesus. To give our entire life to Jesus. You will probably never have the power to control whether people accept you or reject you. But I want to tell you this, you always have the power to surrender to the God who will always accept you, even when you don't deserve it. That's why when Jesus was on the cross, and he's hanging there, he says to God, his Father, God, please forgive them, for they don't know what they do. Forgive them, even though their actions don't deserve it. And I believe right now that some of you who are watching, you're ready to live from that, from the acceptance that God gives you, rather than live for the approval that you're seeking from everyone else. And so I want to give you that opportunity. I want to give you that chance right now. I want to speak to those of you who are followers of Jesus, those of you who have had a relationship with Jesus for some time. I don't know how long you've been in a relationship with God where you've been following or trying your best to follow the ways that God is leading you to. But I think there's some of us who you've been doing that, but you've also got caught up and kind of drawn away from following Jesus and pulled into this direction where you're seeking something else instead. You're seeking to be accepted and not be rejected by everybody else who's around you. And I just want to bring you back for a moment and give you the opportunity to just say, God, you know what, I can't live that way anymore. It's wearing me out. It's breaking me down. I just want to live from the acceptance that you give to me. So if that's you, will you pray this prayer with me? God, I don't deserve your acceptance. I deserve rejection. And recently, God, I've been going in directions they're not toward where you've been calling me. I haven't done it because I want to. I've done it because those voices just sound so loud. The pain of knowing that my dad doesn't accept me. The pain of knowing that my wife doesn't accept me. The pain of knowing that my kids don't accept me. The pain of thinking that my job and my boss and my colleagues, they don't accept me. The pain of realizing that my team doesn't accept me. Maybe even for some of us, the pain of realizing that some of my church friends and brothers and sisters don't act like they want to accept me. God, I've been drawn away by those things, but I want to come back to your acceptance. So God, right now, help me live from who you say I am and not for who others tell me I need to be. And maybe there are some of you who have never had a relationship with Jesus. Maybe since this virus has caused us to stay at home, you have started watching messages for the first time in your life. Maybe you've never thought about stepping into a church, but you're okay with watching a message online because you're curious. And maybe the reason why you're curious is much like Zacchaeus. Maybe you're curious because you have a lot of things, but you don't have a lot of friends, and you don't have a lot of support. And so you've gone into places, you've gone online and you say, God, if you're real, like let me see, you're curious. And so you're looking to see who is this Jesus. And so you're watching messages here through Somos Church and you're watching other messages online. And maybe right now is the moment that you have realized you don't have to live for all the other acceptance that you thought you needed. But instead right now you can receive the acceptance that God gives you. And so if that's you, I want to give you a chance to pray. If you want to start following Jesus today, will you pray this prayer with me? God, I have been so curious about who you are. And right now, it feels so socially unacceptable in my circles to be even watching a message, because everybody that I know says that religion is something that's just fake. So it doesn't feel like the acceptable thing to do. But God, like you did with Zacchaeus, will you call me by my God-given name? Will you speak some truth into my life? Because I don't want to live the way that I've always lived. I don't want to live thinking that I'm always going to be rejected and work toward being accepted. God, I want to live for you. So right now, God, will you forgive me of the ways that I have done? And will you change my life right now in a matter of seconds? Will you change my life in a matter of seconds through your grace and your goodness? Will you make me, when I open my eyes, somebody who is completely different than I was before? God, we know that your son on the cross said, forgive us, even though we don't deserve it. So God, help me, forgive me, and bring me new life. In your name I pray, amen. I just want to say, for all of you who prayed that prayer, I want to ask you to do something. I want to ask you to do something. Maybe it doesn't feel comfortable for you. I want you to let us know in the comments that you prayed that prayer. All that you have to say is, I prayed. That's it. Just put the comment in the section, the chat. Just say, I prayed. And we'll know who you are, and we'll be able to pray for you by name, that God's going to continue to give you the grace that you need to live in the acceptance that God gives you. So everybody else right now, let's celebrate together. I hope that you'll clap your hands. You'll do something to celebrate with those around you. All the voices today of the people who said, my life is going to be changed forever. My life is going to be changed forever. Thank you for joining us again this weekend. We hope that you'll invite your friends. You can stay in the comment section after this message is done. We'll reach out to you. We'll talk to you. We'll pray with you if you want. And we can't wait to see you again next week. Have a great weekend. See you, everybody.